I died on the rain-slicked ferrocrete of Ethelberg Hive. The death was not physical. My body was taken, tested, carved open, and rebuilt. It survived. But the boy I was, the youth named Kylan, he died that day. The angel's penitent descended from a sky perpetually stained with the ochre of industrial smog. They were not golden gods, but figures of grim, gray ceramite, their armor the color of ash and forgotten tombs. Their pauldrons were inscribed with scriptures of contrition, and their helmets were fashioned into the weeping visages of sorrowful angels. They did not come with offers of glory. They came with a demand, a tithe. The planetary governor, trembling in his spire, had offered up 100 of the hive's most violent, most resilient youths to satisfy the chapter's need for new blood. I was one of them, a ganger from the mid-levels known for my swift knife and my refusal to bow to any of the larger syndicates. I was a survivor. That was my only qualification. The last thing I saw of my old life was not a person, but a place. The Sector 7 hydroponics vats. It was a stolen place for me, a territory I'd won in a knife fight with a rival ganger. But it was also where she worked. Ilara. She was a tender of the vats, her hands always stained with nutrient-rich soil, her hair perpetually damp with the mist that fell from the sprinkler systems. She was not a fighter. In the harsh economy of the hive, she was considered fragile. But I saw a different kind of strength in her, a resistance of spirit. While we in the gangs fought over scraps of metal and territory, she fought to make things grow in the cold, artificial light. Our interactions were fleeting moments, in the hum of the hydroponic pumps, a shared glance, the brush of her hand as she passed me a cup of reclaimed water. Once I was bleeding from a slash on my arm, and she, without a word, cleaned and bounded with a strip of cloth from her own tunic. Her touch was cool and sure. I never thanked her. In the underhive, gratitude was a vulnerability, but I remembered it. I remembered the quiet focus in her eyes, the way her brow furrowed. The day the angels came, I was at the vats. I wasn't supposed to be. It was neutral ground, a place I went to think. She saw me there, and for a moment our eyes met. Then the world exploded with the roar of dropship engines. Gray giants emerged from the mist, and a hand the size of my torso clamped down on my shoulder. As I was dragged away, I twisted in the iron grip. My eyes found her in the chaos. She was standing by a bank of nutrient pipes, one hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide, not with the terror everyone else showed, but with a profound, heartbreaking sadness. She took a single aborted step forward, as if to... what? Stop them? It was the most futile human gesture I had ever seen. That image was burned into my mind. Ilara, amidst the green, growing things, her face a mask of sorrow, as I was taking into the gray, sterile world of the angel's penitent. It was the last human face I saw. The rest was a symphony of pain and erasure. The journey to the fortress monastery on the dead moon of Leriath. The examinations by the apothecaries who spoke of me as Subject Gamma 7. The brutal conditioning that broke my body and rebuilt it. The hypno-indoctrination that scoured my memories, burying them under layers of tactical data, imperial history, and litanies of penitence. They told us we must atone for the sin of our mere existence, that only through service and death could we find redemption. They taught us to hate the flesh, to see its wants and needs as weaknesses, They taught us that emotion was a flaw in the armor of the soul through which corruption could seep. Through it all, the memory of Ilara did not die. It could not be erased. The hypno-conditioning, for all its power, could not find it. It was not a loud declarative memory. It was a quiet, sensory ghost. It was the feel of cool, damp cloth on a wound. It was the scent of loam and growing things amidst the sterile odor of antiseptic and ozone. It was the sight of a green shoot pushing through cracked ferrocrete. It was not love. I, Kylan, might have loved her, but Kylan was dead. What remained was Brother Cassian. And for Cassian, the memory was not an emotion. It was a datum, an anomalous piece of data that defied categorization, a persistent, illogical fragment that would surface at the most inopportune times.
During the implantation of the osmodula, as my bones cracked and reforged themselves, my mind, screaming in agony, retreated to the cool, quiet humidity of the hydroponic vats. During a particularly intense session of hypno-indoctrination on the evils of attachment, the image of her sad eyes would flash before my own, a silent counterpoint to the roaring dogma. When I first donned my power armor and felt the black carapace interface with my nervous system, becoming a second skin of war, I had a fleeting, bizarre impulse to wonder what she would think of it. These were not yearnings. They were malfunctions, glitches in the perfect machine the chapter had sought to build. I confessed them once, early on, to the chaplain. "Revered chaplain," I said, kneeling in the silent reclusium, "during meditation an image persists, a face from my past. It is distracting." Chaplain Malek, a figure of terrifying devotion, whose skull helm was never removed, had placed a hand on my head. His voice was a grating whisper from his helm's vox grill. "The flesh struggles against its purification, my son. It clings to the echoes of its sin. This face is a phantom of your former weakness. You must hate it. You must scour it with prayer and focus. To remember is to falter. To falter is to betray the emperor." So I learned to hate the memory. I built walls of prayer around it. I buried it under battle cant. When the ghost of her face appeared, I met it with a silent litany of rage. I am fortification. I am vengeance. I am penitence. The memory became my personal heresy, a secret shame to be mortified through duty and violence. I became a good space marine, an exemplary space marine. I was swift to obey, ruthless in combat, and utterly devoted to the chapter's creed of sorrowful wrath. I rose to the rank of sergeant in the 3rd Battle Company. My brother saw me as a pillar of resolute. They did not know that the foundation of that pillar was cracked, haunted by the ghost of a girl from a hive world, a ghost I fought a constant silent war against. For decades, the war was contained within my own mind. We fought across the sector. Orcs on the plains of Armageddon, piratical Eldar raiders in the Cephas Belt, the insidious Genostealer cult uprisings on dozen worlds. With every bolt round fired, every Xenos life extinguished, I sought to kill the ghost within. I thought I was succeeding. Then we received our new orders. A distress call from the Ethelberg system, my home. A chaos cult, the cult of the splintered god, had risen from the underhive, consuming the planetary defenses with startling speed. The angel penitent with the closest chapter. We were to purge the infection. We were to return to the place of my birth, to the world where my ghost was born. The war was no longer internal. It was about to become terrifyingly real.
The strike cruiser Penitent Blade tore its way from the warp into the cold void of the Ethelberg system. From the viewport of the assault bay, the world was a cancer. Where there should have been the steady, disciplined lights of a functioning hive, there were the uncontrolled, fiery blossoms of war. The smog was now stained with the deeper black of burning promethium and the sickly violet of warp-tainted energies. "Brother Sergeant Cassian," Captain Theron's voice echoed over the vox, "your squad has the vanguard. The primary hive spire is compromised, but the governor's last broadcast indicated a holdout in the old starport, Sector Primus. Your objective is to breach the cult's lines, secure the starport, and extract any surviving command personnel. The Blade of Sorrow will provide fire support. Cleanse the rest." "Acknowledged, Captain," I replied, my voice the flat, emotionless tone demanded by the Codex. "The Emperor's will be done." Inside my helm, my secondary heart kicked in, not from battle rage, but from a cold, sharp tension. Sector Primus. It was adjacent to Sector 7, to the hydroponic vats. "It is a tactical objective, nothing more," I told myself. "The vats are a source of food. The cult will seek to control them. It is a location of strategic value. My past knowledge of its layout is a tactical advantage. That is all." My squad, 10 brothers in grim gray, stood ready around me. They were my weapons, my hands. I knew them as I knew the parts of my bolter. Brother Zeal, the stoic heavy weapons specialist, hefting his multi-melter. Brother Tyrus, the sharp-eyed marksman, his sniper rifle already blessed. Brother Valerius, my second, a warrior of few words and unshakable resolve. "Valerius," I said, "drop pod deployment in 90 seconds. The enemy is numerous and fanatical. Expect no quarter. Give none." "By the Emperor's grace we shall purge them," Valerius intoned, the ritual response. The drop was a controlled fall into hell. The pod shuddered as it ripped through the atmosphere, the external sensors showing a world on fire. We impacted with the force of a meteor, the pod's doors blasting outwards to reveal the heart of Ethelberg's war. The air, which I had not breathed in decades, was thick with the smells of my youth: ozone, rust, recycled air, now horribly corrupted by the coppery stench of blood, the foul odor of opened bodies, and the cloying incense-like smell of chaos worship. The architecture was the same, the towering, oppressive structures of the hive, but now they were defaced with bloody sigils and hung with mutilated corpses. We emerged firing. Bolters roared, their mass-reactive shells detonating inside the bodies of the cultists. They were a rabble, clad in ragged robes and scavenged flak armor, their eyes burning with a mad, zealous light. They charged us with crude axes and laser weapons, screaming praises to their dark god. They were nothing. Chaff. We cut them down with mechanical efficiency. We moved as one, a wall of ceramite and death, advancing through the carnage we sowed. "Push forward," I commanded, my auspex mapping a path to the starport. "Zeal, clear that barricade." The multi-melter whined, and a wave of pure heat vaporized a makeshift wall of wrecked vehicles and bodies. We marched through the molten slag. But the cult was not without its own power.
Hulking, mutated forms began to appear amidst the rabble. Things that were once men, now swollen with chaotic energy, their limbs distended into claws, their mouths splitting into fanged maws. A beast of this kind, a hulking brute with skin like cracked ceramic, charged Brother Levius. "Levius, left flank," I barked. Levius turned, his chainsword roaring to life. He met the charge, but the mutant was impossibly strong. It swatted his blade aside and slammed him against a wall, the ceramite of his chestplate cracking audibly. I was already moving. My own chainsword, Remembrance, screamed as I brought it down in a sweeping arc, shearing through the mutant's arm. It howled, a sound that was half pain, half fury, and turned on me. I fired my bolt pistol point-blank into its face, once, twice, 3 times. The third shell found its mark, and its head exploded in a shower of bone and corrupted matter. I knelt by Levius. The apothecary, Brother Corvus, was already there. "He will live," Corvus stated, injecting a stimulant into Levius's neck port. "3 ribs fractured. He is combat ineffective. Valerius, have 2 brothers escort him to a defensible position. We continue the advance." My voice was cold iron. There was no room for grief, only for the mission. As we pushed deeper, the familiar geography of the hive began to press in on me. This corridor, where I had once ambushed a rival ganger. That market concourse, where I had bartered for stolen parts. And then we reached a junction. To the right, the most direct route to the starport. To the left, a wide access tunnel that led to Sector 7 hydroponic vats.
My auspex flickered. "Sergeant," Valerius said, "I am detecting a significant energy source from the leftward tunnel, fluctuations consistent with a warp rift. It is a major locus of their power." I stared down the leftward tunnel. The strategic part of my mind, the part that was pure space marine, knew the logic. A warp rift was a greater threat than a starport. It could summon demons, corrupt the very planet. It had to be sealed. The mission parameters had just changed. The other part of me, the part that housed the ghost, felt a cold dread. The vats. The rift was at the vats. "The primary objective is secondary," I announced, the words tasting like ash. "The rift takes priority. We move to contain it. Zale, prepare the melta-charges. We will collapse the tunnel after we purge the source." "A wise tactical decision, Brother Sergeant," Valerius said, and I heard the approval in his tone. He saw only a commander adapting to the battlefield. He did not see the war raging inside my soul. We turned left. The journey to the vats was a descent into a different kind of hell. The corruption was thicker here. The walls bled a black, viscous fluid. Strange, phosphorescent fungi grew in pulsating patches, and the air hummed with a psychic pressure that made my enhanced senses ache. The cultists here were different too, more organized, their robes cleaner, their chants more coherent. They were the inner circle, the priests of this madness. We fought through them, our bolters and blades working in grim unison. But with every step, the ghost within me grew stronger. The scent of loam was now mixed with the smell of rotting flesh. The hum of the hydroponic pumps was drowned by discordant, maddening hymns. Finally, we blasted through a sealed bulkhead and emerged into the vast cavern of the Sector 7 hydroponic vats. The sight struck me with a physical force. It was a perversion of my memory. The great vats, which should have been brimming with green, vibrant life, were now filled with a bubbling, blood-dark sludge. The plants were twisted into agonized, screaming shapes, their leaves like grasping hands, their fruits like weeping eyes. In the center of the cavern, where the main nutrient distributor had been, a rift of screaming energy tore at reality. It was a wound in the world, a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and shapes, from which faint, shrieking things flitted in and out. And there, standing before the rift, was the source of the energy signature. A chaos sorcerer, clad in ornate blood-red power armor, his helmet fashioned into a leering demonic face. He was chanting, his hands weaving patterns in the air that solidified the rift. But my eyes were not on him alone. They were drawn to a smaller figure, chained to a metal post near the edge of the central vat. It was her, Alara. She was older, her face lined with years of hardship, her hair streaked with gray. But her eyes were the same. They were not wide with terror like the other prisoners I could see scattered around the chamber. They were filled with a deep, weary sorrow and a flicker of that same resilience I remembered. She was looking at the sorcerer, her jaw set, as if defying him with her silence. In that moment, the ghost became real. The quiet, haunting memory solidified into a living person, and the walls I had built around it for decades shattered. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of battle faded to a dull hum. My enhanced mind, capable of processing 1,000 tactical variables in a second, focused on a single, impossible datum. She is alive. Then the sorcerer's voice cut through the chaos, amplified and distorted by the warp. "Ah, the Emperor's soulless automatons arrive. Too late. The garden of the splintered god blooms in this fertile soil. These lives," he gestured to the prisoners, "will be the seeds of a new reality." He raised a clawed hand, and dark energy crackled around it, aimed at the group of prisoners, at Alara. Every instinct, every ounce of my training screamed at me to prioritize the sorcerer, to order my squad to focus fire, to charge him and end the threat. But I did not. "Alara!" I roared. The name, a name I had not spoken in half a century, a name that belonged to a dead boy, erupted from my vox grill. It was not a battle cry. It was a raw, desperate human scream. I fired my bolt pistol not at the sorcerer, but at the chain holding her. The mass-reactive shell struck true, shattering the link. She fell to the ground, free. The sorcerer laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "What is this? Does the machine have a heart? How delicious!" My squad was momentarily frozen. They had never heard me speak like that. I had broken protocol. I had broken the codex. I had, in that single moment, committed heresy. "Brother Sergeant!" Valerius's voice was sharp with confusion and alarm. The sorcerer took advantage of our hesitation. He unleashed a wave of psychic force. It slammed into us, throwing brothers Tyrus and Gideon back against the wall with bone-jarring force. Zale was caught in the blast, his multi-melta spinning from his grip. The sorcerer turned his attention back to me. "I will take your heart, little machine, and see what makes it beat." He hurled a lance of black fire. I brought up my chainsword, the teeth screaming as they bit into the immaterial energy. The force of it drove me to one knee. I could feel the demonic power trying to corrupt the metal, to worm its way into my mind.
Through the haze of struggling against the sorcerer's will, I saw Alara scramble to her feet. She didn't run. She looked at me, her eyes meeting the lenses of my helmet. There was no recognition there. How could there be? She saw only a giant in gray ceramite, an angel of death. But in her gaze I saw not fear, but a desperate, determined hope. She grabbed a falling cultist's las pistol, her hands trembling but her aim steady. She fired at the sorcerer. The weak laser beam spanged harmlessly off his armor, but it was enough. It broke his concentration for a split second. The pressure on my blade lessened. That was all I needed. With a roar that was part battle cant, part something else entirely, I surged forward. I abandoned defense. I became the weapon I was made to be. My chainsword carved through the air, forcing the sorcerer back. He parried with a blade of solidified shadow, the clash sending sparks of dark and light flying. "Valerius, the rift, now!" I yelled over the vox. My squad, shaken but disciplined, snapped back into action. Valerius and the others laid down a suppressing fire against the remaining cultists, while Zael, recovering his multi-melter, took aim at the base of the rift. My duel with the sorcerer was a whirlwind of violence. He was powerful, but I was a product of the Emperor's own science, a master of close-quarters annihilation. I was anger, I was hate, and in that moment I was fighting for something more than duty. I was fighting for a ghost, for a memory, for a feeling I had been taught to scourge from my soul. I saw an opening. His guard was down for a microsecond. I lunged, remembrance screaming. The teeth of my chainsword bit deep into his side, tearing through ceramite and flesh. He screamed, a sound of rage and pain, and retaliated with a point-blank burst of warp fire that scorched my armor and seared my skin beneath. I ignored the pain. I fired my bolt pistol into his chest again and again until the magazine was empty. He staggered back towards the raging rift. "Your heart," he gurgled, before Zael's multi-melter fired. A beam of pure, star-hot energy struck the sorcerer, vaporizing him instantly. The uncontrolled psychic feedback lashed out, and the rift flared, screaming like a dying beast. "The charges!" I commanded. Zael and Valerius hurled the melter charges into the heart of the destabilizing rift. We had seconds. "Fall back!" I yelled. My squad began a fighting retreat towards the entrance. My eyes found Ilara again. She was helping another prisoner to their feet. She was going to be too slow. I did not think. I acted. I ran to her, the floor shaking beneath us. I scooped her up in my left arm, her weight nothing to my enhanced strength. She gasped, her hands gripping the pauldron of my armor. I turned and ran, my power armor's servos whining as I pushed them to their limit. We exploded out of the hydroponics chamber just as the melter charges detonated. A wave of heat and force slammed into our backs, followed by the colossal roar of collapsing rock and metal as the entire cavern sealed itself forever. We were in the relative silence of the access tunnel, the only sound the groaning of stressed metal and the ragged breathing of my squad. I set Ilara down gently. She stared up at me, her face pale, her chest heaving. The other prisoners were safe. My squad was looking at me. The silence was heavy, accusatory. I had called her by name. I had prioritized a single mortal life over the immediate destruction of a high-priority target. I had compromised the mission. I had shown attachment. Valerius stepped forward. "Brother Sergeant, the starport." I straightened up, my helmet turning from Ilara to Valerius. The mask of the sergeant was back in place. The rift was the greater threat. It is neutralized. The starport is our next objective. Move out. I did not look back at Ilara as we marched away. I could feel her eyes on my back until we turned the corner. But I had taken the ghost out of the garden, and now it was here, in the open, a living, breathing secret that my brothers had witnessed. The war was no longer internal. The battlefield was now my own soul, and I had just shown the enemy my greatest weakness. The mission was not over, but for Brother Sergeant Cassian, the true battle had only just begun.
The silence in the squad's tactical voxnet was heavier than the adamantium of our drop pod. It was a void, filled not with the absence of sound, but with unasked questions. We marched through the corpse-strewn corridors towards the starport, our bootfalls a rhythmic, funereal drumbeat. The mission parameters were clear once more, the path forward illuminated by the Auspex's cold logic. But the path behind us was shrouded in the smoke of my transgression. I had given them no explanation. A Space Marine sergeant does not explain himself to his subordinates. Yet the question hung in the air, as tangible as the stench of promethium and ozone. Who is Ilara? Brother Valerius marched a half-pace behind my right shoulder, his presence a silent accusation. He was devout, even for an angel penitent. He saw our creed not as a philosophy, but as the absolute, unyielding truth. To him my outburst would not be a simple lapse in discipline. It would be a crack in the very foundation of our being, a hint of the sin we were created to purge. My own mind was a war zone. The conditioning fought a desperate, rear-guard action against the psychic shockwave of seeing her. Litanies of penitence and battle cants scrolled through my thoughts, a digital wall against an analog memory. I am the Emperor's wrath. I am the blade that purges weakness. I am sorrow for the fallen. I am fortification. But beneath the chant, a single, traitorous thought echoed. She is alive. The memory was no longer a ghost. It was a living, breathing variable that had inserted itself into the tactical equation of my existence. I had held her. The weight of her, insignificant to my enhanced strength, felt like a tectonic plate shifting the landscape of my soul. The feel of her rough-spun tunic against my ceramide landbrace, the quick, bird-like flutter of her pulse I'd felt through my armor's sensors. These were new data points, terrifying in their vividness. We reached the starport perimeter. The cultists here were better armed, fortified behind sandbag emplacements and a salvaged Hydra flak tank, its barrels sweeping the approach. "Tactical spread, pattern Delta," I commanded, my voice thankfully returning to its flat, command-grade monotone. "Zale, the Hydra is your priority. Valerius, take brothers Gideon and Corvus and flank right, clear those elevated walkways." The squad moved with the flawless precision I had drilled into them. Bolters chattered, Zale's multi-melta spoke its language of pure annihilation, and the Hydra exploded in a satisfying fireball that shook the ground. Valerius's fire team swept the walkways with controlled bursts, cultists tumbling like broken dolls. It was a textbook assault. It should have felt clean, purifying. But as I fired my bolter, each shell detonating with a percussive crump, a part of my mind was elsewhere. It was calculating the distance back to the Sector 7 access tunnel. It was assessing the structural stability of the hive levels between here and there. It was, against all reason and training, formulating a contingency plan for a location that was no longer relevant to the mission. We breached the starport's main concourse. The holdouts here were the Planetary Defense Force troopers, their uniforms torn and filthy, their eyes hollow with days of fighting and terror. They looked upon us not as saviors, but as avenging spirits, and they fell to their knees, weeping and offering prayers. The governor's command staff was in a fortified control tower. We found them huddled around a cracked strategic table, their faces gaunt with exhaustion and relief. The governor himself was dead, his throat slit by a cultist assassin. A Colonel Liana, her arm in a sling, was in command. "Angels of the Emperor," she said, her voice raspy with exhaustion and relief. "Your arrival is a miracle. They came from the deep hive. We never stood a chance." "The threat is not yet extinguished, Colonel," I stated. "The primary warp locus has been neutralized, but the infection is widespread. We will secure your evacuation." As Valerius coordinated with the PDF officers and Corvus tended to the wounded, I moved to the tower's armored viewport. The starport offered a panoramic view of the hell that was Aethelberg. Fires raged across the hive spires. In the distance, I could just make out the smoldering, collapsed sector that had once been the hydroponics vats. My helmet's auto-sensors zoomed in. The area was a tomb. A part of me, the part that was Brother Cassian, the loyal servant of the chapter, felt a grim satisfaction. The heresy was purged. The anomaly had been sealed away. The other part, the ghost of Kalen, felt a loss so profound it was a physical ache in my chest, a hollow space where my second heart beat. "Brother Sergeant." Valerius's voice was close. I had not heard him approach, a failure of awareness. I did not turn from the viewport. "Report. The FPDF estimates 3,000 civilian souls are sheltering in the lower sublevels of this starport. The cult is aware. They are massing for a final assault. We are the anvil. The blade of sorrow will be the hammer." "A sound strategy," I acknowledged.
He was silent for a moment, the hum of his armor's power plant a low thrum. Then he spoke again, his voice lowered, the words for me alone on a private Vox channel. "Brother, the name you called out, in the garden of corruption." I turned my helmet slowly to face him. The red lenses of my helm met the soulless black of his. It was a tactical identifier, a fragment of pre-indoctrination intelligence that surfaced under stress. It has been purged. It was a lie, a smooth, practiced lie that felt like heresy in and of itself. Valerius was still for a long moment. I could almost feel his gaze, sense the conflict within him. His duty to his sergeant warring with his duty to the chapter's creed. "The chaplain will require a full debriefing," he said, finally, his tone neutral. "It is protocol." "Indeed," I replied. "All anomalies in behavior must be documented for the apothecaries to study." The implication hung between us. I was an anomaly to be studied, a specimen. He gave a curt nod and moved away to attend to the defenses. The breach was contained, for now, but the fissure remained. Valerius would report this. It was his duty. My secret was no longer mine alone. The cult's assault began an hour later. It was a tide of fanatical flesh hurling itself against our fortified positions. We held the line. Bolters overheated, chainswords were blunted on bone and armor, but we held. The Blade of Sorrow's orbital bombardment turned the approaches to the starport into a molten wasteland, breaking the back of the cult's offensive. In the lull that followed, as we oversaw the evacuation of the civilians onto waiting shuttles, Colonel Liana approached me. "Lord Angel," she said, her voice hesitant, the deep hive sectors, the residential and industrial blocks, are they lost?" "The purge is ongoing," I said, the standard non-committal answer. "The chapter will cleanse this world of its corruption." She nodded, wringing her hands. "It's just, my sister, she was a tender in the Sector 7 hydroponics, a stubborn woman. She refused to leave her post even when the riots started. She said the people would need the food when order was restored." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The ambient sounds of the starport, the crying children, the roar of shuttle engines, the moans of the wounded faded into a dull roar. I looked down at the colonel. I saw the same resolute sadness in her eyes that I had seen in Ilara's. "Your sister," I said, the words like stones in my mouth. "What was her name?" "Ilara," the colonel said, her voice thick with emotion. "Her name was Ilara." Was. The finality of the word was a bolt shell to my chest. The colonel believed her sister was dead, buried under 1,000,000 tons of rock and sealed warp taint.
It was the logical conclusion, the proper conclusion. And I, her sergeant, her commander, the one being on this planet who knew the truth, said nothing. I offered no comfort. I gave no sign. I simply stood, a monolith of gray ceramite, as immovable and unfeeling as the fortress monastery on Lirath. "The Emperor protects the faithful," I intoned, the hollow ritual phrase feeling like the greatest lie I had ever told. She nodded, tears streaking through the grime on her cheeks, and moved away to board a shuttle. I was left alone amidst the organized chaos of the evacuation. The ghost was no longer just a memory, or a living woman. It was now a chain of responsibility, of connection. Ilara had a name. She had a sister who grieved for her. She was woven into the tapestry of this world in a way I could never be. Yet a single thread of that tapestry was now tied around a part of me that I could not excise. The evacuation took 2 days. We secured the starport, conducted cleansing patrols in the surrounding sectors, and awaited the arrival of the Imperial Guard to begin the long, grueling work of retaking the hive. My squad performed flawlessly. I led with cold efficiency. But the silence between Valerius and I was a chasm. On the 3rd day, as we prepared to beam up to the penitent blade, a priority transmission sliced through the command vox. It was from a Skitarii patrol operating on the fringes of the collapsed zone. Their binaric cant was sharp, urgent. ++ pattern recognized, life signs detected, subsector 7 gamma, structural pocket, survivors, +++. Subsector 7 gamma, the lower utility conduits of the hydroponic sector. The area had not fully collapsed. It had been sealed off. Survivors. Valerius was looking at me. The entire command staff was looking at me. The logical, tactical decision was clear. The area was unstable, potentially still tainted. The survivors were a low-priority asset. The Guard could handle it in time. Our mission was complete. But the ghost had a name, and it had a sister. I made my decision. "Squad Cassian," I announced, my voice cutting through the static of the vox. "We have Imperial citizens to extract." I turned and began striding toward the ruined access tunnels, my chainsword humming in my hand. I did not look back to see if they followed. I was their sergeant. They would follow. The war for Athelberg was over. The war for Brother Sergeant Cassian had just entered its final, desperate phase. I was walking back into the tomb, not to seal it, but to resurrect the ghost that haunted me. The descent into subsector 7 gamma was a journey into the hive's ruptured intestines. Where our initial assault had been a storm of fire and righteous fury, this was a silent, grim procession through a grave. The melta-charge detonation and subsequent collapse had sheared through conduit lines, power relays, and structural members, leaving a jagged landscape of twisted metal and shattered rockcrete. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of ozone from severed cables that still spat fat blue sparks into the gloom. Our helmet lumens cut swathes through the darkness, illuminating frozen tableaus of the life that had been extinguished here. A half-eaten meal ration on a rusted table, a child's stuffed toy lying face down in a puddle of coolant. We moved in perfect silence, the only sounds the crunch of debris under our armored boots and the low hum of our power packs. Valerius was a shadow at my back, his vigilance a tangible force. He had not questioned the order. To do so before the men would have been insubordination, but his silence was a verdict in itself. My auspex flickered, its passive sensor struggling to map the unstable terrain. The Skitarii's binaric signal had been precise, but getting there was a different matter. We were navigating a 3-dimensional maze of collapse, where a single misstep could bring 1,000,000 tons of hive down upon us. "Thermal signature ahead," Brother Tyrus reported from point position, his sniper's eyes picking out details the rest of us would miss. "Faint, multiple sources, 50 meters through that rupture in the bulkhead. The rupture was a gash in the adamantium wall, torn open like a can, its edges gleaming like sharpened teeth. It was just wide enough for a space marine in armor to squeeze through, one at a time. "Zail, secure the entrance. Valerius with me, the rest defensive perimeter," I ordered. I went first, turning sideways to slide through the jagged opening, the ceramitite of my armor scraping against the torn metal with a screech that set my enhanced teeth on edge. On the other side, the space opened up into a large maintenance conduit, one of the primary arteries that had fed the hydroponics vats. The ceiling here was bowed but holding, supported by a forest of fractured support columns. And there, huddled in the dim light of a few flickering glow globes, were the survivors. There were perhaps 30 of them. Men, women, a few children, their faces gaunt and smeared with grime, their eyes wide with a terror that deepened exponentially as my massive gray form emerged from the darkness. They shrank back, a collective gasp escaping them. To them, I was not a savior. I was death, incarnate. And then I saw her. She was standing slightly in front of the others, a frail but unyielding figure. She held a piece of rebar like a club, her knuckles white. It was Ilara. Her eyes, those same sorrowful, resilient eyes, were fixed on me, not with the blank hope from our initial encounter, but with a dawning, horrified recognition. She was looking at my armor, specifically at the left shoulder pauldron. During my duel with the sorcerer, his warp fire had not just scorched the ceramite, but it had burned away the top layer of gray paint and the scripture of contrition, revealing the older, darker layer of paint beneath, and the faint, ghostly outline of a symbol that had been there before the chapter's rebirth into the angel's penitent. A symbol I myself had forgotten. A stylized, grasping hand. The symbol of the blood scorpions. It was impossible. A coincidence, a trick of the light, and the damage. But the way she was staring, she saw it. The ghost of my past was literally etched onto my present. Valerius squeezed through the rupture behind me, his presence causing another wave of panic among the survivors. His helm swept the chamber, assessing threats, counting souls. "Thermal signature is weak. 2 require immediate medical attention. The structural integrity of this pocket is failing. We must move swiftly, Brother Sergeant." I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my enhanced mind racing, calculating probabilities, dismissing them only to have them return with greater force. "You!" Ilara's voice was a whisper, but in the tomb-like silence it was clear as a bell. It was cracked from thirst and fear, but there was no mistaking it. She wasn't looking at my helmet lenses anymore. She was looking at that faded symbol. "The gang! The scorpion!" Valerius went perfectly still beside me. I could feel his gaze shift from the survivors to me, a laser of pure focus. This was the precipice. The moment the ghost ceased to be an internal heresy and became a tangible one that could see me declared excommunicate Tritoris. All it would take was a single word from her. A name. I took a step forward, the floor groaning under my weight. I loomed over her, a giant of ceramite and death. I could see my own grim reflection in her wide eyes. I could end this. A single, swift blow. A regrettable casualty in a dangerous extraction. It would be the logical, the safe thing to do. The thing the chapter would expect. The chaplain would commend my resolve. My hand tightened on the grip of my chainsword. The muscles in my arm, capable of punching through plasteel, coiled. Ilara didn't flinch. She lowered the rebar, her shoulders slumping, not in defeat, but in a profound, weary acceptance. Her eyes never left the ghost on my shoulder. "Kaelin," she breathed, the name a secret spoken into the face of oblivion. The name was a detonation in the confined space. It hung in the air, a heresy given voice. Valerius took a sharp, audible breath over the vox. "Brother Sergeant." I ignored him. I reached out not with my weapon, but with my left hand. I did not touch her. I pointed past her, to the group of cowering survivors. "You will follow us," I commanded, my voice a distorted growl from the Vox grill, devoid of all emotion, all recognition. I turned my back on her, on the ghost, on the name that now echoed in the silence between Valerius and me. The moment of choice had passed. I had chosen the path of greatest danger. I had let the ghost live. "Valerius, take point. I will take the rear guard." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, a monumental act of doubt from a space marine. "As you command, Brother Sergeant." The extraction was a tense, silent nightmare. We led the survivors back through the jagged maze, a slow, painful procession. I stayed at the very back, my senses stretched to their limit, listening for the groan of failing structures, the scuttle of cultist stragglers, and the sound of a name being whispered again. My world had narrowed to the fragile line of mortals ahead of me, and the burning awareness of the brother who marched at its head, a brother who now carried a secret that could destroy us both. We emerged from the ruins into the relative light of a secured sector, where Imperial Guard troopers had established a forward operating base. The survivors stumbled forward, weeping with relief, embraced by the waiting soldiers. Ilara was among them. As a medic led her away, she glanced back once, her eyes finding me one last time. There was no joy in them, no gratitude, only that same deep sorrow, now mixed with the confusion that mirrored the war in my own soul. As the guard took charge of the survivors, my squad formed up around me. The mission was complete. We had purged the warp rift, secured the command staff, and rescued civilians. By any objective measure, it was a victory. "Squad Cassian, prepare for extraction," I voxed. "A moment, Brother Sergeant." Valerius's voice was cold, formal. He had switched to our private channel. "The anomaly, the name, it requires addressing. The chaplain." I interrupted, my voice laced with a threat I had never before directed at a brother battle. "The chaplain will be informed in due course, as per protocol. The battlefield is not the place for this. Our duty is to the chapter, and our immediate duty is to return to the penitent blade. Is that understood, Brother Valerius?" There was a long pause. I could picture his face behind his helmet, the conflict between his loyalty to me and his fanatical devotion to our creed. "Understood," he said finally, the word clipped and heavy. "For the chapter." "For the chapter," I echoed. We were beamed up into the sterile, incense-filled hangar bay of the penitent blade. The chapter serfs bowed as we passed. The mission was over. But as the deck plates vibrated beneath my feet with the power of the strike cruiser's engines, I knew the true battle was just beginning. I had saved the ghost. I had let a mortal speak my old name, and I had, in the eyes of my most devout brother, committed an act of unforgivable weakness. The silence of the starport had been heavy. The silence of the strike cruiser was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb waiting for its occupant. And as I marched towards the debriefing chamber where Chaplain Malak awaited, I knew I was walking to my own execution, not of the body, but of the soul. The ghost was safe on Ethelberg, but here in the cold, unforgiving void, Brother Sergeant Cassian was about to be called to account for his sins. The reclusium aboard the penitent blade was a place of shadows and sharp angles, a deliberate architectural representation of the chapter's soul. There were no grand statues of heroic figures, only reliefs of weeping angels and skeletal forms engaged in eternal penance. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, sanctified oils, and the faint metallic scent of blood from the self-flagellation chambers that adjoined the main chapel. I stood at attention before the raised dais, my helmet removed and tucked under my arm. The cold air of the ship felt alien on my skin. a sensation I usually ignored. Now, it felt like a prelude to an autopsy. Across from me, Chaplain Malik was a statue of black ceramite and bone, his skull helm seeming to drink the dim light. To his right stood Apothecary Verus, his face a network of scars and biomechanical augmentations, a Narthecium gauntlet humming softly on his arm. To his left, Captain Theron, his face a grim mask of disappointment. And beside me, Brother Valerius, his presence a living accusation. The debriefing on the tactical mission had been concluded with sterile efficiency. The purge of the warp rift was logged as a success. The extraction of the command staff and civilians was noted. Now came the true purpose of this conclave. "The formal report is filed," Captain Theron began, his voice like grinding stone. "But there is an irregularity. Brother Valerius, you invoked the right of anomalous conduct. Speak." Valerius did not hesitate. His voice was clear, devoid of malice, which made it all the more damning. "During the primary engagement at the Locus Hereticus, Brother Sergeant Cassian exhibited a significant deviation from protocol. Upon sighting a specific mortal female among the prisoners, he did not prioritize the enemy psyker. Instead, he called out a name, Ilara. He then diverted his fire to free her, compromising the squad's tactical focus for 3.7 seconds. Later, during the extraction from Subsector 7 Gamma, the same mortal identified the Brother Sergeant by a previous designation, Kalen. The names hung in the sanctified air like blasphemies. Ilara, Kalen. Apothecary Verus leaned forward, his bionic eye whirring as it focused on me. A recurrence of pre-indoctrination memory, a failure of the hypno-conditioning, a fascinating, if dangerous, anomaly. Anomaly? Chaplain Malik's voice was a whisper that scraped at the soul. It is not an anomaly, it is a cancer. He took a step down from the dais, his Crozius Arcanum held loosely in his hand. The power field around its head cast flickering shadows on the walls. "You were told to scour this weakness, Brother Cassian. You were told to hate the phantom of your past. Yet, you not only allowed it to persist, you allowed it to dictate your actions on the battlefield. You prioritized a single mortal life over the destruction of a high-priority target. You allowed a creature of flesh to speak a name that is dead to you. Explain this failure of will." I stared straight ahead at the weeping angel carved into the wall behind the dais. I had prepared for this. I had constructed a fortress of logic around my actions. The initial outburst was an involuntary retrieval of tactical data. The location was familiar. The name was a cognitive tag for that familiarity. Freeing the mortal denied the psyker a potential sacrifice and source of psychic leverage. The later identification was inconsequential. The mortal was delirious. My focus remained on the mission objective. The survival rate of the extraction was 98%. It was a pathetic defense, and we all knew it. I was parsing my heresy into after-action report jargon. "The survival of the sergeant's spirit is what concerns me," Malik hissed, now standing directly before me. He was slightly shorter than me, but his presence was immense, a vortex of pious fury. "You do not plead ignorance.
You plead utility. You dress your sin in the raiment of tactics. This is the deepest corruption. He began to circle me, his Crozius Arcanum leaving a faint tracery of energy in the air. The flesh is weak. It clings to its desires. It whispers of connections, of affections. These are lies. They are the hooks by which chaos pulls the soul into the abyss. Every being you feel something for is a lever that can be used to break you. This Ilara, she is your lever. She is a flaw in the steel of your devotion. And a flaw, no matter how small, must be purged. He stopped in front of me again. The Codex Astartes provides a litany for this, the litany of scorn. You will recite it with me. It was not a request. It was a command and a punishment. I am fortification, Malik began, his voice rising. I am fortification. I repeated, the words ash in my mouth. My heart is a redoubt. My heart is a redoubt. My will, its adamantine walls. My will, its adamantine walls. I scorn the weakness of the flesh.
I hesitated. The ghost of a touch on a wounded arm flickered in my mind. I scorn the weakness of the flesh. I renounce all former ties. The image of her face amidst the green, growing things. I renounce all former ties. I despise the memory of affection. Her eyes filled with sorrow as I was taken. I despise the memory of affection. The name of my past is a curse. Kaelin. The name was a whisper in my mind, a secret I had clutched for decades. I forced it out. The name of my past is a curse. The face of my past is a mask of lies. Her face was not a lie. It was the only truth I had left. My voice faltered. The face of my past is a mask of lies. Moloch's hand shot out, not with the Crozius, but with gauntlet fingers gripping my jaw with crushing force. Louder, brother! Make the Emperor hear your penitence! The face of your past is a mask of lies! I met his gaze, my own eyes hard. I could not say it. The words would not come. The ghost had too strong a hold. Chaplain Malik released me, turning to the others. The conditioning has been compromised. The spirit is infected. The memory is a psychic scar that will not heal through prayer alone. Apothecary Varus nodded, his expression one of clinical interest. The synaptic pathways can be re-severed. A focused psiosuppressant regimen combined with neural reconditioning. It is invasive. There is a 40% chance of permanent degradation to tactical creativity and independent problem-solving. Captain Theron looked at me, his days weighing the value of a seasoned sergeant against the risk of a corrupted one. The chapter cannot afford a flawed weapon. The cure must be absolute. Can you burn this out of him? The chaplain's skull helm seemed to grin. The Emperor's fire purifies all. We will excise this weakness, Captain, even if we must take a part of the warrior with it. You will submit to the rite of purgation.
Your squad will be reassigned. Your armament is forfeit." It was a death sentence, not of the body, but of the mind, the soul, the last remnants of the man who remembered a girl in a hydroponic vat. They would burn Kalen out of me, and in doing so, they would shatter the very parts of Cassian that made him an effective leader. I would become a hollow thing, a mindless automaton, fit only for the most brutish frontal assaults until I was spent. Valerius stood rigid, his face unreadable. He had gotten what he wanted, purity. Yet I saw no triumph in his eyes, only a grim satisfaction in duty fulfilled. This was the end, the final victory of the chapter over the ghost. But as two chapter serfs approached to take my helmet and my weapon, something in me broke, not with a roar, but with a cold, clear snap. I had spent a lifetime building walls. I had spent decades fighting a silent war. I had confessed. I had done penance. I had followed orders. And for what? To be unmade because a single human memory had proven stronger than all their science and all their dogma. I was a weapon of the Imperium, but a weapon must have a will to be aimed, and my will was my own. The serfs reached for my bolter. My hand, faster than a striking serpent, clamped down on the weapon, holding it fast. Every eye in the reclusium fixed on me. The air crackled with tension. "Brother Cassian," Captain Theron's voice was dangerously quiet. "Stand down." I looked at Chaplain Malak, at Apothecary Varus, at Captain Theron, and finally at Valerius. I saw not my commanders and my brother, but my executioners. "The weakness you fear," I said, my voice low and steady, no longer the flat tone of a space marine, but laced with a lifetime of suppressed defiance, "is the only thing that ever made me more than just a machine. You would break me to save me from a flaw. I say the flaw is what makes me strong." It was heresy, pure, undeniable heresy. Chaplain Malak raised his Crozius, the power field blazing to life with a crackle of pure energy. "Then you are lost." In that moment, the choice was made. The war was over. There was no longer a brother sergeant of the angels penitent. There was only a man, a ghost, and a weapon. I raised my bolter. Not at them. At the floor between us. The sound of the shot was deafening in the enclosed space. "I am not lost," I said, the smoke from the barrel curling around me. "I am free." I turned and strode from the reclusium, leaving my former brothers in stunned silence. I was a traitor. I was damned. But for the first time since I was a boy in a hive, I was whole. The ghost and the weapon were one, and we were going to war.
The corridors of the penitent blade were a labyrinth of sanctified steel and whispered prayer, a world I had known for decades. Now it was hostile territory. Alarms began to blare, a strident, pulsing shriek that echoed the newfound chaos in my soul. The single bolter shot in the reclusium was a declaration of war more profound than any I had ever made against Xenos or Heretic. My mind, a transhuman engine of tactical processing, shifted gears instantly. The sentiment was gone, burned away in the crucible of that final, irrevocable choice. What remained was cold, hard pragmatism. I was one against a chapter. My goals were simple, impossible, and absolute. Survive, escape, find Ilara. The third objective was the illogical core around which the other two were structured. It was the ghost's demand, and the weapon would see it done. I moved not with the heavy, deliberate tread of a space marine on patrol, but with the predatory grace I had used in the underhive, a fluidity that my enhanced body executed to perfection. My enhanced hearing filtered the blaring alarms into actionable data, the thud of armored boots mustering in the primary assault bays, the frantic chatter of serfs over the ship's vocks, and the rising power of the engines as the ship went to battle stations. They would expect me to go for the armory, for a Thunderhawk, for a direct, brutal fight. They understood wrath and penitence. They did not understand guile. I turned away from the main thoroughfares and plunged into the secondary maintenance conduits, the ship's arterial system, narrow and claustrophobic, smelling of grease and ozone. My gray armor was a disadvantage here, a stark beacon. I needed shadow. Ahead, a chapter serf, a hunched, robed figure carrying a data slate, froze at the sight of me. His eyes widened in terror. He was no threat, but he was a witness. He opened his mouth to cry out. I was on him in a blur. My hand, large enough to encircle his head, clamped over his mouth. I did not kill him. The memory of Ilara's sorrowful eyes held my hand. Instead, I applied precise pressure to his carotid artery. His eyes rolled back, and he slumped, unconscious. I dragged him into a shadowed alcove. My objective was the ship's mortuary. It was a place of silence and reverence, where the fallen were prepared for their final journey into the cold embrace of the void. It was also where the fallen's personal effects were stored before being ritually cleansed or returned to the chapter's reliquary. Among the recent dead from the Ethelberg campaign would be Brother Livius, whose cracked armor I had seen in the Apothecarian. His armor would be undergoing repair, but his combat blade, his bolt pistol, the tools he had carried on his last mission would be there, waiting for the Tekmeran's rites of reconsecration. The door to the mortuary was unguarded. Who would defile such a place? I keyed in my former command-level access code. The door slid open with a hiss. The chamber was cold, the air still and heavy with the scent of sanctified incense and the underlying sterile odor of death. Rows of biers held the sheet-draped forms of the fallen, their armor stacked neatly beside them. My enhanced senses picked out the familiar scents of battle, cordite, blood, and the unique ceramic alloy of our chapter. I found Livius's bier. His effects were laid out on a nearby table. A well-worn bolt pistol, 3 magazines, and his combat knife, its blade still bearing the microscopic scars of his final fight. As I reached for the weapons, a voice, soft and aged, spoke from the shadows. "I wondered if you would come here, Cassian." I spun, the new old bolt pistol rising in my hand. Apothecary Varus stepped from behind a statue of the Emperor in mourning. He was not in his battle plate, but in his simpler apothecary robes, his Narthesium gauntlet dormant. He held no weapon. "Varus," I growled, the vox grill distorting the name into a threat. "Do not mistake this for opposition," he said, his biological eye holding a strange, calculating light. "The hypno-conditioning is absolute.
The genetic coding is inviolate. Yet you have retained a core of self that should have been erased. You are a paradox, Brother Cassian. The most fascinating paradox I have ever encountered in 3 centuries of service. I am no longer your brother, I said, my finger resting on the trigger. A technicality, he waved a dismissive hand. You have broken your oath, yes, but you have done so for a reason, a human reason. Do you have any idea what the Magus biologist on Mars would give to study you, the secrets of the soul you represent? He was not here to stop me. He was here to observe.
The gene seed within you is still pure, he continued, his tone conversational, as if we were discussing a minor tactical report. It would be a waste to see it destroyed. And your anomaly may yet hold value for the chapter's future. Malek's fire would destroy that potential. What are you proposing, Apothecary? I asked, my aim never wavering. An experiment, he said simply. I will not help you, but I will not hinder you. I will report that you overpowered me. In return, you will survive. You will live with this ghost of yours, and I will be watching, from afar, to see what becomes of a space marine who chooses to remember. It was a cold, clinical bargain, typical of the man. He was risking his own standing for the sake of knowledge. He was offering me a thread of hope, not out of compassion, but out of scientific curiosity. I do not require your permission to survive, I said. No, he agreed, but you require a ship. The patrol craft, Penitent Shard, is being prepped for a routine sweep of the system's edge. Its servitor pilot is programmed for a simple patrol pattern. Its manifest lists it as carrying 1 passenger, myself, for a biological survey of a nearby asteroid field. A manifest I have just altered. He tossed a small data slate onto the table beside Livius's effects. It showed a ship schematic and a launch bay designation. Why? I asked, the single word laden with the weight of his betrayal of the chapter's trust. Because a specimen must be placed in its natural habitat to be properly observed. Your habitat is no longer here. Go. Be the paradox. He turned and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows of the mortuary, leaving me alone with the dead and a choice that was no choice at all. I took the data slate. I took Livius's weapons. They felt foreign in my hands, yet familiar. They were not remembrance, not my own war gear, which was now forfeit. They were tools. They would suffice. The journey to the launch bay was a masterpiece of applied stealth and violence. I avoided main corridors, moving through ventilation shafts and crawl spaces, my gray armor now smeared with grime and coolant. I encountered 2 patrols of Brotherhood. The first I evaded by retreating into a plasma conduit, the searing heat a minor discomfort against my enhanced hide. The second I could not avoid. They were 3 strong, led by a veteran I recognized, Brother Hadrian. They rounded a corner and found me waiting. "Traitor!" Hadrian roared, his bolter coming up. There was no time for words. I was already moving. I fired Livius's bolt pistol, the round striking Hadrian's weapon, knocking it from his grasp. I closed the distance before the other 2 could bring their guns to bear. I used the combat knife, not to kill, but to disable. A precise slash severed the power cabling on one brother's backpack. He stumbled, his armor locking up. I drove my shoulder into the second, sending him crashing into the wall with enough force to crack the plasteel. I turned back to Hadrian, who was drawing his combat blade. I did not draw my own.
I simply grabbed his wrist, the ceramite of our gauntlets grinding together, and squeezed. I felt the bones within his armor break. He grunted in pain, his blade clattering to the deck. I looked at them, these brothers I had fought alongside for decades. I felt nothing. No camaraderie, no regret. They were obstacles. "Tell Malek," I said, my voice flat. "The ghost sends its regards." I left them there, disarmed and wounded, and ran for the launch bay. The penitent shard was a sleek, dagger-like vessel, small and fast, little more than a cockpit and an engine. The launch bay was in controlled chaos, serfs preparing for the patrol. They saw my armor and assumed I was the assigned passenger. I boarded without challenge. The servitor, a grotesque fusion of man and machine, was already slaved to the command throne. I did not displace it. I took the co-pilot station, my large frame crammed into the space. I entered the coordinates from Morris's data slate. As the bay doors cycled open and the penitent shard was catapulted into the silent, star-dusted void, I looked back at the penitent blade. It hung in the darkness, a colossal cathedral of war, a home I had just forever forsaken. I was alone, hunted, a traitor to the only cause I had ever known, but I was free, and I had a purpose. The servitor droned the status report. Course plotted for the Ethelberg system. Estimated transit time, 6 hours. I leaned back in the seat, the starfield stretching before me. The ghost had its weapon. The weapon had its target. The war was over. The hunt had begun. Somewhere on that wounded world below, a woman named Ilara was living her life, unaware that the angel she had known as a boy, the monster who had saved her, was now falling from the heavens, damned and determined, coming for her. Not for love, not for romance, because she was the only truth left in a universe of lies.
The penitent shard was a silent sliver of steel and wrath, falling through the void towards the wounded jewel of Ethelberg. Inside, the only sounds were the hum of the life support and the wet mechanical breathing of the servitor pilot. I had jettisoned it an hour into the voyage. Its presence was a tether to the world I had renounced, and its programmed routines could have contained hidden loyalties. Now I was alone with the ghost and the stars. My transhuman mind, no longer occupied with the immediate threats of the penitent blade, turned inwards. The silence was a battlefield. The litany of scorn echoed, a phantom chorus of my former brothers. I scorned the weakness of the flesh. I renounce all former ties. I met each remembered phrase, not with defiance, but with a new, cold clarity. They were not wrong. The flesh was weak. But they had misunderstood the nature of the weakness. It was not the memory of Alara that was the flaw. It was the desperate, frantic need to destroy that memory that had been the true vulnerability. In accepting the ghost, I had found a strength they could not comprehend, the strength of a single, unshakable purpose. Ethelberg swilled in the viewport, a sphere of industry and misery. The signs of the recent war were scars across its surface, blackened patches from orbital bombardment, the faint, sickly glow of lingering chemical fires around the hive. My descent was a controlled, unauthorized entry. I used the shard's limited sensoria to map imperial and civilian traffic, slipping through the gaps like a needle through torn cloth. I was a falling star, but I aimed to land without a sound. My target was not the starport, not the command hubs. It was the fringes, the shattered sectors where the imperial bureaucracy was still struggling to reassert control, where a lone figure could disappear. I set the shard on a crash trajectory towards a designated wasteland zone, a toxic sump region on the edge of the main hive sprawl. In the final moments, I armed the vessel's self-destruct charge, set a 10-minute timer, and ejected. The escape pod was a violent, bone-jarring cocoon. It punched through the atmosphere, its ablative shell burning away, and crashed into the acidic sludge of the sump with a geyser of foul yellow liquid. I kicked the hatch open, emerging into a landscape of nightmares. The air was a chemical miasm that would have killed a normal human in minutes. Derelict machinery jutted from the bubbling ooze like the skeletons of ancient leviathans. The sky was a perpetual sickly orange. I was home. I waded through the corrosive sludge, my power armor protecting me from the worst of it. After a kilometer, a distant, muffled whump echoed across the wastes. A fireball briefly illuminated the smug. The penitent shard was no more. My trail was covered. For 3 days I moved through the underbelly of the hive like a phantom. I avoided the Imperial patrols and the nascent enforcer checkpoints. My gray armor was a death sentence here, a beacon that would bring the angel's penitent down upon me long before I found her. I needed a new skin. I found it in the ruins of a scavenger settlement, a place of rust and desperate commerce built against the hive's foundation pillars. A Ganger-turned-arms dealer, his face a roadmap of old knife fights, had a prize. A suit of battered pre-heresy pattern power armor, looted from some forgotten battlefield. It was crude, patched in a dozen places, and painted in the garish, flaking colors of his gang. But it was functional, and more importantly, it was anonymous. I did not barter. I emerged from the shadows of his storage locker as he was showing it off to a potential buyer. The two men froze, their eyes widening at the sight of my true gray ceramite. The Ganger reached for his weapon. I was faster. My hand shot out, not to strike, but to offer a single high-grade power cell, technology far beyond his ken, scavenged from the shard's ejection pod. "For the armor," I said, my voice a low rumble from my helm. He stared at the power cell, then at me, his greed warring with his terror. He snatched the cell and nodded frantically. I stripped the Ganger's colors from the old armor and began the laborious process of swapping my own gray ceramite for the anonymous, unpainted ceramite. I looked like a mercenary, a relic, a ghost of 100 different wars. It was perfect.
My next objective was information. Ilara would have been processed by the Imperial relief efforts. There would be a record, a name on a manifest, an assignment to a refugee sector. I found my source in a dilapidated data hub that served the Underhive's black market. The data scribe was a twitching, emaciated man named Finn, his body a nest of crude cybernetics, his fingers stained with machine oil. His shop was a cave of flickering pict screens and chattering logic engines. "I need to find someone," I said, placing a bolt shell, the currency of the desperate, on his counter. A woman, Ilara. She was extracted from the Sector 7 collapse. Finn's eyes darted from the bolt shell to my massive armored form. Sector 7. That was the Angel's work. Messy. Records from there are fragmented. Imperial Guard has the main databases locked down tight. Can you access them? He grinned,
a rictus of yellowed teeth and metal. For another one of those, I can access the governor's private diary. I placed a second bolt shell on the counter. His fingers flew across a grimy keyboard, the screens flickering as he sliced through layers of Imperial data fortifications. Ilara, common name. Let's cross-reference with the Sector 7 Survivor Manifest from the Starport extraction. Got her. Ilara, assigned to... damn. Where? My voice was dangerously quiet. He looked up, his face pale. They sent her to the sanguinary reclamation zone, the penitent fields. A cold knot tightened in my gut. I knew the term. It was a euphemism. When a hive was badly damaged, when resources were thin, the Imperium would often reclaim the population by offering them a chance at redemption through labor. The penitent fields were massive, open-air work camps on the planet's irradiated plains, where survivors were put to work reclaiming salvageable materials from the war zone. It was a sentence of slow death by exhaustion and exposure. He shipped her out 2 days ago, Finn said, swallowing hard. Convoy 737, headed for the Gamma 9 worksite. I turned to leave. Hey, Finn called out. You should know. The convoy. It's not just guarded by the guard. There's talk. The angels, the gray ones, they have a presence there, overseeing the purification of the site. Of course they did. Malek would not have let the trail grow cold. He would have guessed the ghost would call me back to its source. The penitent fields were not just a reclamation site. They were a trap. A test laid by the apothecary, or a snare laid by the chaplain. It did not matter. I had my destination. The journey to the Gamma 9 site took another day. I moved like a shadow, riding the tops of cargo haulers, traversing the skeletal remains of transitways, my anonymous armor allowing me to pass unnoticed through the fringes of the Imperial machine. The hive gave way to the blasted plains, a landscape of craters, scorched earth, and the skeletal remains of war machines. The Gamma 9 site was a vision of hell, a vast, dusty plain under a sickly yellow sky, ringed by watchtowers and patrolled by sentinel lockers. Thousands of figures in drab gray coveralls moved like ants through the ruins of a fallen titan, their movements slow and exhausted. The air rang with the sounds of picks on metal and the occasional bark of an enforcer's shock maul. And there, standing at the edge of the main camp, was a sight that sent a jolt of pure cold fury through my system. A figure in the gray of the angel's penitent, his skull helm surveying the scene of mortal suffering with detached piety. It was Valerius. He was here, the chaplain's hound, sent to watch over the flock, waiting for the wolf to appear. I watched from a ridge 2 kilometers away, my helmet's autosensors zooming in. I scanned the endless lines of workers. It was like looking for a single specific grain of sand on a beach. The dust, the identical coveralls, the bowed heads. It was a system designed to erase identity. And then I saw her. She was hauling a piece of twisted plastiel, her movement slow and painful. Even from this distance, I could see the weariness in her frame, the way she stumbled on the uneven ground. But her head was up. She was looking not at the guards, not at the ground, but at the horizon, as if searching for something, as if
waiting. Valerius began to walk, his path taking him along the perimeter of the work detail. He was getting closer to her line. It was a casual patrol, but I knew him. There was nothing casual about it. He was the bait, the staked goat, and he was moving into position to see what predator it would draw. The trap was set. I saw it with perfect clarity. To reveal myself was to spring it, to walk into the sights of the sentinels, the enforcers, and a fully armed battle brother. Every instinct, every shred of my training screamed at me to wait, to observe, to find another way. But I was done waiting. I was done with tactics and patience. The ghost had waited long enough. I stood up from my cover, the dust of the ridge falling from my anonymous armor. I started walking down the slope, towards the camp, towards the trap, towards her. I was a fallen star, a traitor, a ghost in stolen armor, and I was coming to claim what was mine. The dust of the Gamma 9 plains coated my stolen armor, turning it the color of the dead earth. Each step I took toward the camp was a deliberate, thunderous declaration. I was not sneaking in. I was walking into the heart of the trap. My gaze locked on the 2 points that defined my universe. Ilara, struggling under her burden, and Valerius, the unmoving gray sentinel, drawing ever closer to her. Alarms began to blare. The sharp electronic shrieks cut through the din of industry. Workers looked up, confused and fearful. Enforcers turned, their shock moles sparking to life. In a watchtower, a heavy stubber tracked my approach. Valerius stopped. He didn't turn. He knew. He had been waiting for this. I broke into a run. It was not the loping, ground-eating stride of a space marine on the assault, but something more primal, a charge of pure, focused intent. The distance between us evaporated. "Open fire!" an enforcer captain screamed. Lasbolts sizzled against my armor, painting scorch marks on the anonymous ceramite. The heavy stubber opened up, rounds pinging and ricocheting off my pauldron. I ignored them. They were gnats, an irritation. My target was Valerius. He finally turned, his bolter rising with practiced ease. "Heretic!" he roared, the word carrying over the chaos. He fired. I didn't dodge. A bolt round detonated against my chest plate, staggering me for a half step. The shrapnel bit into the ceramite, but failed to penetrate. I kept coming. Ilara had frozen, her eyes wide, staring at the colossal armored figure charging through a hail of fire. She saw the stolen armor, the unknown heraldry. But then her eyes met the lenses of my helmet, and something in her expression shifted. Not recognition, but a desperate, impossible hope. Valerius fired again. This time I swatted the bolt shell aside with my combat knife, the explosion blindingly close. I was on him. We collided with the force of 2 wrecking balls. Ceramite shrieked against ceramite. He was strong, devout, and skilled, but I was something else. I was rage. I was purpose. I was a man fighting for a ghost, and that made me more than a machine. I drove my forehead into his helmet, the impact cracking the eye lens. He grunted, stumbling back, and I brought my knee up into his midsection. As he doubled over, I grabbed the barrel of his bolter, forcing it upwards, and slammed my other fist into his wrist. The bones snapped. His bolter fell to the dust. He drew his chainsword with his other hand. It roared to life, a hungry mechanical snarl. "You have damned yourself for nothing," he bellowed, swinging it in a wide, decapitating arc. I dropped low, the teeth whistling inches over my head. I came up inside his guard, my own knife finding a weak point at his hip joint. I twisted, and he roared in pain, black hydraulic fluid spraying from the wound. "This is not damnation," I growled, my voice raw through the vox. "It is freedom." I drove my shoulder into his chest, sending him crashing onto his back. I stood over him, my boot pinning his chainsword arm to the ground. I raised my knife for the final blow. "Cassian, no!" The voice was not a shout. It was a plea, thin and reedy, but it cut through the battle rage like a laser. It was Ilara. I froze, the knife poised. I looked at her. She was standing just a few meters away, her hand outstretched, her face a mask of terror and compassion. "Don't," she whispered. "Please."
In that moment of hesitation, Valerius acted. With a surge of strength, he threw me off. He scrambled back, clutching his wounded hip. "You see, brother?" he spat, his voice dripping with venomous triumph. "The weakness, it stays your hand. It will be your end." He reached for a grenade on his belt, a crack grenade. He was going to kill her. He was going to kill us all, to purge the weakness in a fireball of righteous death. There was no more time, no more choice. I didn't look at Ilara. I couldn't. I lunged forward, not with the knife, but with my body. I wrapped my arms around Valerius, pinning his arms to his sides, trapping the grenade between our armored chests. I looked over his shoulder, my helmet lenses meeting Ilara's eyes one last time. "Run," I said. Then I triggered my overloaded power pack. The world turned white. The explosion was a sun born in the dust of the penitent fields. It vaporized Valerius and me instantly. It tore a crater in the earth and sent a shockwave that knocked enforcers and workers from their feet. When the light faded and the dust began to settle, there was nothing left of the two angels penitent but scorched earth and fragments of ceramite. Ilara, shielded from the worst of the blast by my body, was thrown back, but alive. She lay in the dust, coughing, her ears ringing. She stared at the crater where the gray giant had been, the one who had called her name, who had fought like a demon, and who, in the end, had died for her. She didn't understand. She would never understand the war that had raged within him, the litanies and the ghosts. All she knew was that a monster had saved her, and in his final act had shown a flicker of something that looked, to human eyes, like love. On the ridge overlooking the camp, Apothecary Varus lowered his magnoculars. He had observed it all, the final data point in his experiment. He keyed his vox bead. Subject Cassian, final log. The anomaly proved terminal. The conflict between conditioning and memory resulted in self-annihilation. However, the memory itself, the ghost, was preserved in the primary subject of its fixation. The human, Ilara, survives. Conclusion: the flaw is not the memory, but the inability to integrate it. A fascinating failure. The gene seed is lost. End log. He turned and disappeared back into the wasteland, his curiosity satisfied. Back in the camp, Ilara slowly got to her feet. The enforcers were stunned, leaderless. The workers were beginning to murmur, to stir. She looked at the crater one last time, then turned her face towards the horizon, towards the possibility of a future he had bought for her with his life. The ghost was gone. The weapon was silenced. But the echo of his sacrifice would remain, a small,
quiet story of something that was not quite love in a universe that had no room for it. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war. But for one woman, there was also, now, a memory of something more. And that was the only victory possible.